chances are, if you're using AI in any way, shape, or form for your podcast, usually it boils down to number one, wanting to save time. And number two, because maybe there's a part of you that believes that AI can do it better than you can, that AI might sound smarter or more polished or help you sound smarter or more polished. But on the flip side of that, leaning too hard on AI might be doing more harm than good for your brand. And there are some common mistakes that hosts make when they let AI do the talking for them. So this is why I invited Michael Katz, a former AI skeptic turned founder of a different kind of AI company, to join me in the studio today and talk about some of the ethical concerns about using AI as a thought leader and some of the ways that it might be unknowingly undermining your expertise right now, as well as what it really takes to use AI without losing your unique voice. Welcome to Insider Secrets to a Top 100 podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Elmer. Let's make your business binge-worthy. Michael, welcome to the show. I am stoked that you are here today. We have so much to unpack, and I can't wait to dig in.
Honestly, I'm super excited to be here too. This is exciting.
Awesome. Well, okay, take me back in time because I know that you have a tech background. You come from a tech background. But when AI first came out, you've said that you were the first person to be like anti-AI, skeptical, annoyed, but now you run an AI company. So make it make sense. Why were you anti-AI initially? And what was it that led you to make the leap?
Yeah, well, look, I worked in some of these, larger enterprise B2B tech companies. And, funny enough, we were building AI features there too. And, this was, I remember really coming across this and starting to build it in 2016, 2017. And it was like text and sentiment analysis. And every single thing I ever saw building those tools was, man, our customers are so mad sometimes about the accuracy here. And it wasn't necessarily that we had unique problems. It was just that kind of like the self-driving car problem where if it makes one mistake, people get inordinately mad about that. Whereas, people can get crashed all the time. But I just remember thinking, I'm so skeptical about the actual ability here. And I remember the first time I heard about ChatGPT was with a partner of ours who was very much focused on that space. And I just remember kind of scrolling past it on LinkedIn and being like, cool, another fad. And I think it's maybe I become more cynical over time. And then, of course, I think probably what is it, like a year and a half, 2 years ago, we really started to wake up to this stuff. And even then, I just think I was still in my cynical phase. And I saw some of the things that it produced and I thought, this isn't that good. Like, this just isn't really up to my bar. And I don't really seek automation if it's not going to do something for me that's actually going to be additive to my workflow or my life, especially if it feels unnatural and robotic. That is like the ultimate sin to me, honestly. And so I guess I just kind of kept staying in my lane and saying, this will pass. And it didn't really seem to be passing. And I started to try my hand at it. And I think like with anything like this, it just is super, super addictive. And that was kind of like my phase one with all this was like, okay, a path to even trying. And I guess long story short, and we can get into it, I, started to use it so much and started to think about it more and more that I became kind of simultaneously fascinated and frustrated by what existed out there in terms of the stuff I wanted to do with it. And that really kind of led me to some of the stuff today.
I think when you say fascinated and frustrated, you were speaking to so many people right now. I can remember sitting on the couch. My husband was like in ChatGPT. He set up an account. This was when it first came out. And he's like, oh my gosh, you are going to love this. Look what you can do. And he's like showing me all these things. He's like, you can plan your podcast episodes. He's like, give me a topic. I'll give him a topic. And it spits out the most generic, awful answers to whatever. I can't remember what the topic was at the time. And I'm like, there's no way that this will work. I don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. I don't care about it. I am so big into using your authentic voice. I mean, that's why people listen to you if you have a podcast in the first place, right? They want to connect with you. They want to connect with the human. And that human to human connection is what drives business. And at the end of the day, it's that trust that gets built. If you don't have that connection, then it's going to be difficult to convert people. So I just remember being like, no, there's no way. But then similar to you, where it was like, okay, now it's here to stay. We see that it's here to stay. Can I use it to save time? Can I use it to help me streamline things? I'm curious to get your take, Michael, like knowing what you know of AI and your own journey to kind of coming full circle and being like, okay, now here I am trying to make the AI industry better because I believe it needs to be better and it can be better. What are some of the mistakes that you see people making and podcasters specifically, maybe unknowingly making when it comes to AI?
I think the first mistake people make is using it as like a 0 to 1 content generation tool. So I'll say that first and foremost. Outside of even like podcasting is like, if I said, write me a blog about sales and I was selling to salespeople, it would produce kind of some of the most generic garbage that you've ever seen, as you mentioned. And it'll say, in the ever evolving world of sales. I mean, that I guarantee you that phrase will be used. Okay. And you will get just some like, I don't know, maybe a couple people will read it. I don't think it's going to really rank well on SEO. It's just not good. And I don't even care whether you can detect whether it's AI or not in that case. It's fundamentally not very interesting. And the same goes for, anyone who's listening, who's on LinkedIn. I see very legitimate people, I would argue, using AI in a very clear way to do like more comments on other people's posts. And it's so detectable, and it just feels, I wouldn't, the word slimy is wrong because I know everyone has the best of intentions. And so I don't want to, attribute any malintent to anybody, but it doesn't sound very good. I'll say that much. It doesn't sound very additive to the world. And so these like bottoms up generation use cases, I find, I don't know if mistake is the word I'd use, but just not that interesting. And maybe devaluing your brand a little bit in terms of who you are. And maybe you get away with it for a while, but it's just not, it's not very high quality and it doesn't sound very authentic. And so I think those are some of the big mistakes people use. And then, when once we get into the kind of the podcasting and recording space, some of the stuff that I'm most interested in right now is you have this really good original content and you're being told you should use AI. And you hear people saying, I'm using ChatGPT right now for this kind of thing. And it's kind of evident there is a lot of art to using AI effectively, for better or for worse. And I'm not saying anyone's going to be perfect because it's always changing, but there's certainly levels to it. And it's a bit of a gateway drug in a good way, but like you're not going to necessarily get the best results from that. And it's going to be slow and iterative process. And it might take you in some cases longer than it would have to just do it from scratch in a way that's imperfect, but solid. And so I just see people making those kinds of mistakes, which is like thinking you can do anything for them and thinking they can do it all alone. And it ends up producing just more slop into the world, which doesn't really help anybody, honestly.
Yeah, it adds to the noise. It doesn't help you stand out. And this is one of the big questions that I had to ask myself too, because, if AI has been described as like the sum total of all human wisdom, we're all asking AI the same or similar questions in a given niche, then how is you copy and pasting those outputs going to make you sound different than anyone else? How's it going to make you stand out than anyone else if we're all asking the same questions and getting the same or similar outputs? And this is across channels too. This is not just with like one particular platform or another. And the point that you brought up about just it devaluing your brand a bit, it also brings up some ethical concerns too, where it's like a lot of people go into AI thinking, oh, this is going to help me sound smarter. This is going to help us sound better. Or this is going to help us find a brand voice when maybe there wasn't one before, when really it could be masking the voice that you need to have in order to really create those authentic connections with people. As humans, we're very attuned to when something is authentic and when it's not. So let's dig into like the ethical concerns and how can it devalue the brand if you're not using it in the right way, or if there's, a better way to be using it so that it elevates the brand, doesn't devalue. But then also, can we say that it's authentically you if, you're going to it as the source of the information, whereas it replaces you as the thought leader and the source of the information?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's complicated. And like, that's the whole thing about all this is like, there's no hard and fast rules. I'll give you a good example. Like people talk about the word delve a lot. It's very kind of like common. Oh, the word AI is delve a lot. I used to like the word delve a lot and sue me for that. I used it. I heard someone say no one uses that word. I use that word. Okay. And I'm kind of angry at AI for taking that away from me, candidly. It's taking something I love, not in an explicit way, but away from me. And that's what I mean by no hard and fast rules, which is, okay, I'm perfectly fine with people saying certain things, but at what expense and did it actually come from them? And so I think there's an ethical thing, which is, you're right, around what is my voice? I know people who I think write in a way that sounds so much like them. I think we've all seen these people, and it's very imperfect, and there's mistakes in it, and there's a certain kind of like folksy nature. And I find it more compelling in a lot of ways when it sounds like that. And so using AI as an extension of yourself is a perfectly ethical thing. As the little guy, which a lot of people probably who are these solopreneurs or entrepreneurs are, to compete with bigger people or to compete in any market and to feed your family or whatever it might be yourself, you need to find ways to automate and scale and, compete with people with larger resources. This is a tool that really can enable that. But once you start getting into the territory of this can replace any sort of opinion or perspective that I have, there's really nothing coming from me in the first place. There's no original content that underpins this. I think it shows at some point with your clients. You're recruiting them in a way that I'm like, it's definitely not what they're going to get long term. And that shows eventually.
Yeah, 100%. So going back to this idea of the voice, because I know this is something that you value, and really just this originality that humans bring to the world, whether that be in art or in music or in communication or whatever the ways that we interact with each other as humans. And I know you grew up in Baltimore and your dad immigrated here to the US, actually to New Orleans, where I'm based, from Chile. And I'm curious, Michael, how would you say that being the son of a first generation immigrant has impacted not just your work ethic, but also shaped your unique voice and perspective in the world?
It is really interesting to think about, like, we talk about code switching a lot. My mom is very much born and bred Baltimorean, and I would say her family is, I don't know, like, not most people don't go to college. Okay, most people don't go to college, and my dad's side is this kind of like untethered immigrant side, and it's a very unique background, and I find myself kind of talking in different ways when I talk to different people, and so we all like contain multitudes inside of us, but it certainly like made things interesting to me when I thought like actually a really sad part about my life is that my children won't have that. And I get a little bit actually sad about that, where I'm kind of like, well, that really drove a unique perspective that I had in the world, whether it's just like my ethics and morals and goals or the way I speak. And I thought, wow, my dad has an accent. That's so cool. My mom has an accent and it's a very different kind of accent. Like, people don't like the Baltimore accent, but hey, it's different at least. And that's what I would say about New Orleans. I'm like, New Orleans is maybe America's greatest city because it maybe is the last one that of its size that has like a difference. It's just like nothing's like it. Whereas everybody else is kind of getting flattened out. And that's really comparable to what we're talking about here, which is like the world flattening out is a bad thing, at least to me. I don't want it to flatten out. Like I want us to just kind of at least entrench a little bit in our thing. And so for me, that's something I always try to maintain over time. And like, I think I've lost it at various points in my life. And I continue to kind of fight against that tide a little bit to be like, how can I sound like me? Oh, you hear a lot about like, here are the formulas that work online. And I'm like, I'm tempted, but I also just kind of want to not do that sometimes. Like maybe I want to do things that are not good for the algorithm. Maybe I want to do things that just suck and are embarrassing just because. Difference for the sake of it, I think, is maybe one way to describe it. Something I really value.
I can tell that you value that. And I think, this is interesting too. We can look at art, I feel like, as a good metaphor or analogy for AI, where it's like, okay, if you're looking at a Monet and you're at this gallery, it's like the water lilies painting, that famous Monet painting. And it's like, you're looking at the real thing. And it's like, wow. And you're just kind of like out of body experience thinking about just the beauty of that art and how did this become so famous and like what went into creating this piece of art and all that. And all the things that make a Monet a Monet. And then you look at the copy that's hanging on your living room wall, let's say, or at the office wall in your co-working space. And it's not the same. And not only is it not the same, it's not as valuable. We don't place the same level of value on the original versus the replication. So what would you say then? What do you think needs to change in AI specifically with where we stand in the industry right now? Obviously, it's new, it's ever evolving, not to use an AI turn of phrase, but what needs to change in our perspective of AI so we can begin to bridge that gap and leverage it ethically to support us in getting our authentic voice out into the world?
To answer your question directly is like, it's more about how do you look at your AI? What purpose does it serve for you? It's sort of like the smartest assistant you've ever had that's like has way more knowledge than you, but is also like a young child. And it's some kind of mix of that where it's like, you need to be very particular with it and to not be misinterpreted. And you need to train it and ensure that it understands what it needs to do for you as opposed to replacing you. And you wouldn't want it to replace you, honestly. I mean, most people don't want their jobs to be replaced. And so like, I think it's really about like how we treat it and how we kind of form a view of it in our mind of like, what can it generate for me? We've had like executive assistants and, ghostwriters for a very long time now. And sometimes that exists in your company. You're a CEO, you have your top communications person, and they know exactly how you write and they know exactly what you want to say and you check everything. That's a really good model to think about how we use this, which is like, you got to really understand me and I got to train you. I got to sit in a room with you for a little while and tell you that's not really sounding very good. And also sometimes maybe be a little bit surprised. Whoa, that was better than something I would have done. I like that a lot. I'd love to incorporate that in future ones too. So it's also not to say that we shouldn't be open to being improved upon. That's not what it is either. I don't want to say it should sound exactly like you today. We all level up over time. That's a good thing. But how do you have someone who's incredibly productive, who can read or listen to something in 10 seconds that takes us an hour? That's how we should think about these things. Is someone who's just insane processing speed, but at the end of the day, serves us in ways that make us better.
I agree. And I also feel like someone described it to me once this way, where it's like, you have an intern working for you. That intern doesn't know half the stuff that you know. And maybe they won't ever evolve to the point where they know everything that you know, because they will never be you. But at the same time, you wouldn't just throw the papers back at the intern and be like, wait, you didn't write this the right way. There's a level of expectation there that you wouldn't expect the intern to get it on the first try or the 10th try or the 20th try. I think that's a perfect segue into the conversation in the next episode that I know we're going to dig deeper into, more of the tactical, like how do we train it? How can we leverage this very powerful tool? And I think for me, this is where the fascination piece comes in, and also maybe a little bit of the frustration as well. But we know we've got this powerful tool at our fingertips. How can we leverage it in a way that does help me share my authentic thoughts with the world? Maybe it saves me a little bit of time in the process, but also doesn't take away from the work that you're putting into the world, the unique voice and perspective with which you're sharing in the world. How are we using it in a way that one isn't taking away from the other, but rather they're both kind of working in tandem to help us toward the greater goals that we've set out to achieve, whether that's personal, work, whatever that might be.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing too. And I think like anyone who's interested in podcasting and creating in general, it's some of the most meaningful work you can do, as shallow as a lot of people would view it as. It really is. And we humans have had two ways of communicating really ever, which is we can write something down, kind of whatever that means, cave drawings or, writing, printing press, or we can talk it out. And we've used many names to describe that, whether it's a movie or TV or podcast, whatever it is, we're talking, we're having a conversation. I don't really want those to be destroyed. Certainly. Like I don't want those to be devalued in their own way. And so, sharing your original voice is one of the most meaningful things you can do to leave your mark. Podcasting is an incredibly powerful medium for that. I just don't want to see it misused. Right. And I think, me personally, I was up, at 3 a.m., 4 a.m. all the time trying to do this stuff and say, this doesn't sound like me. And that is not really an acceptable world. And maybe a lot of people would be comfortable with that. But yeah, I really want to help people. And I think sounds like you do too, is find that unique voice and make it easier for them, make it accessible, because we're a better world if we have more people sharing their perspectives publicly, no matter how few people they're reaching.
100%. Well, thank you for sharing your perspective here with us today. And I'm super excited to dig into a little more detail and nuances of actually utilizing AI to do exactly that.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
And if you're curious to know, how do we actually make AI sound less like AI and more like yourself so that you can scale your thought leadership across multiple platforms? And if you're someone who values the way that others view your brand and you want to be able to use AI to save time, but also to use it in a way that's authentic and true to you, then don't go anywhere, because all that's coming up next to help you make your business binge-worthy.